Have you ever heard about ortho or orthochromatic film and wondered what it is? Well, today is your lucky day because we are going to be talking about Rollei Ortho 25. So stick around to find out how to get the best out of it and what the community thinks of it. Quick one before we get started. If you like film photography and want to see more videos like this one, film reviews, tips and tricks, that kind of thing, then please do make sure you're subscribed to our channel and notifications are turned on. Thank you so much. Rollei Ortho is a black and white film with a very specific look, and this comes back to its name, orthochromatic. To understand orthochromatic, we're going to go to our old friend, the colour light spectrum. Now you might be surprised that once again with a black and white film we are talking about the colour spectrum, but of course by now you realise that that's where a lot of the subtlety, a lot of the nuance of different black and white films comes from. You may have heard that black and white film is dependent upon silver halide crystals that are activated when light is shone upon them when you take a photo. Native silver halide crystals are only activated by actually a small sliver of light around blue and green. That is what activates them, which means they do not interact with the red part of the colour spectrum. To understand a little bit more about this, let's go back in time to Hollywood in the early 1900s. When this film first came through, obviously all of the Hollywood black and white films were shot on orthochromatic film, i.e. film that uses the native silver halide that can only see in blue and green, can't see red. When you look at those very early Hollywood films, you'll notice things like the blue skies are generally totally blown out because of the sensitivity to blue to try and balance the scene. That basically is lost to highlights. People's faces can look quite strange because the reds aren't being put up. Now there was a huge industry that grew up of artist makeup, basically that was trying to make skin tones look normal under orthochromatic film rather than in real life. So if you see or hear about any of the stories of actors off set, still in the makeup, it does look very, very strange because the idea is that the directors were trying to make orthochromatic film look as normal as possible for their finished movie. And of course that meant that they had to use a special filter to try and understand what their film would see, the costumes, the sets, the people, the backgrounds. It all made life very, very difficult. Now in 1907, a German chemist worked out that if you added dyes to silver halide crystals, you could increase the sensitivity across the spectrum and it could start to see red. It became panchromatic. It could see the entire colour light spectrum. And that makes life a lot easier because then a black and white film that is panchromatic, which most of them are these days, sees the world very similar to how you would recognise it in black and white. Reds show up, as do blues, as do greens, and everything in between. And stills photography moved very quickly to panchromatic, but Hollywood didn't, not for a couple of decades, because it was 3 or 4 times more expensive. And that is bad news for the Hollywood studios at the time, but good news for us understanding what this film does, because it gives us much more material to understand. As an entire side note, when the movies did then move from ortho to panchromatic, the needs of the makeup artists turned from trying to make skin tones show up normal when the film couldn't see red light, which was fairly blunt and strange as a tool, into the more traditional now, we'd say, making people look as good as they can under normal situations. And actually one of the first makeup artists in that era was a chap called Max Factor, hence the start of that cosmetic brand was in this transition from ortho to panchromatic movie shooting. Now one factor that is important, when I've been talking skin tones and early Hollywood, I am talking about Caucasian skin tones because of institutional racism. Unfortunately, what that means is that a lot of the images that we have, a lot of the sample we have, and a lot of R&D at the time was designed around trying to make white skin and white people look more normal under these situations in film, in stills photography. And the technology wasn't necessarily there for darker skin tones. It also means that even today, when I look at sample photos, and you'll see some of them coming up, different portraits, most of them are looking at what happens to white skin under different situations. What I would love to see, and hopefully you guys can help us shoot a lot of different portraits across a much more diverse skin tone is I'd love to see more understanding of how darker skin tones react to ortho. So please do bear that in mind as I talk through the sample photos we have and the impact this will have on your photos. Most of the research available, most of the things that I've seen are with that inherent bias. Now, what can you expect? So as I've said, you've got to think reds are going to show up very dark, greens and blues are going to show up very light, particularly because your camera meter is going to be panchromatic. It won't understand that you're trying to minimize the greens and blues relative to the reds. It won't understand that your film can't see reds. It will try and balance for everything. This isn't like using a filter in that regard with an SLR. So your light meter will meter for normal, and then from that, orthochromatic film will not see the reds and will see more blues and greens. So if you take a photo of a landscape with lots of greens, be careful not to overexpose. I would say blues and blue skies, but that hasn't been much of a problem in the UK in the last month. That's one thing to account for. And then when you are looking at portraits of Caucasian skin in particular, you will notice that the lips around the eyes that are quite red will be very dark on orthochromatic film, and it will look very noticeably different. You'll then switch back to seeing a panchromatic film and it will all seem much more evened out. Contrast will tend to be higher, especially with scenes that have distinct red that get darker or distinct greens that will get a lot brighter. Aside from all of the orthochromatic stuff, it is an ISO 25 film, low ISO, which we all now know means high detail, fine grain, better resolution. So you will get incredibly sharp photos from this film as well. I am really looking forward to doing a couple of things with this. One is I am going to be using my roll of film to shoot things that are very definitely red. So whether that's household objects that we know are red, like red apples, or logos, or traffic signs, anything that our brains know should be red and should understand what it will look like in a balanced panchromatic shot will look very different on orthochromatic film, so I'm looking forward to experimenting with that. I am also looking forward to experimenting with lots of portraits, diversity of skin tone in particular, but also playing around with makeup, embracing the max factor look at this and seeing what red lipstick does, what green and blue eyeliner does, all of these tweaks that will allow you to really play with the highlights, the shadows, the contrast on someone's face to bring out different features. I think it should be really fascinating. Wonderbox subscribers, I'd love to know what you're thinking as you look through the sample photos, as you reflect on what this film will be able to do in certain scenes, in certain situations. What are you going to shoot? I would love to hear your thoughts, and if you've shot it before, please do share below. If anyone has incidentally shot lots of darker skin tones before, I haven't found it in my research, but please do point me towards anything that will help us all get a broader understanding of what this film looks like in a more diverse situation. That would be amazing. Otherwise, I am really excited to see what you guys create, and I look forward to you adding orthochromatic film to your list of films that you understand how to get the best out of, that you take great photos with, and that you really enjoy the results. Thank you so much, and I'll see you again soon.